The scene occurs on Tuesday around 5:30 post-meridium in the Baltic Sea off the coast of Estonia. We are in the control room of the oil tanker Jaguar, a sea monster 243 meters long and 42 meters wide. One of those famous ghost ships that allow Russian oil to be shipped to China or India while bypassing Western sanctions. On board, the crew is Russian, but the boat crosses and the global positioning system coordinates show it. Estonian waters are turbulent. The Estonian Navy intervenes. A patrol boat is sent to board the boat, lead it to a port, and therefore intercept it. The Russian crew then receives confirmation that it's out of the question. Listen.
Request will be denied.
The tanker promptly follows the order and escapes to international waters. The Estonian Navy steps up, thus being boarding. A helicopter approaches, then a plane panics on the bridge. Listen. At that moment, everything goes haywire. The Russian army sends this plane in turn, but this time it's a fighter jet, a Su-35. To repel the Estonians, he engages in a chase with the helicopter and the plane and manages to make them flee. The Estonian patrol boat stays nearby and is content to escort the ship, who will then stop over off this small Russian island in the Gulf of Finland, the island of Auckland. Moscow won the game this time thanks to the intervention of its army. Indeed, it's a constant hunt. In this case, what immediately aroused suspicion was that this famous ship, Jaguar, was sailing without a flag. The Estonians confirmed its mission thanks to its registration. It is indeed a ship under British sanctions since they were strengthened last week. Indeed, listed as belonging to the Russian Ghost Fleet. Hundreds of old tubs bought up over the past 3 years to export Moscow's black gold at all costs. Ships often registered under flags of convenience: Panama, Liberia, Gabon.
But in the end, do these ghost ships have the right or not to sail in relation to the sanctions that the Westerners regularly impose?
In fact, yes, David, but only when they are in international waters, as long as a ghost ship stays there. Even if it has been identified and placed under sanctions by the European Union or by England, who often update their list. It can move freely. Western navies can only stop it in ports or in their territorial waters. That's actually what happened to our famous Jaguar.
Thank you, Justine. So first, a few questions to the operational specialists on this stage. Xavier, what would have happened if the Russian plane hadn't intervened? Would Estonian soldiers have descended onto the bridge to try to take control of the ship?
A Russian boat has previously entered Finland's territorial waters. Finland arrived, helicopters came, they dropped commandos and they took control of the ship. They obviously discovered that it was part of the Ghost Fleet, but in addition, it was one of the ships involved in the destruction of underwater infrastructure. And to cut cables. So potentially, it's not only a Ghost Fleet that's illegally exporting oil. Everything we know about the Russians, but in addition, potentially it's the type of ship that does. Either intelligence against us or they're cutting off our vital European infrastructures. Hence the double interest in controlling them, especially when they enter our territorial waters, where we have the right to question them.
Sending Estonian soldiers onto that bridge would have been a perilous operation. If the Russians
defend themselves, potentially, yes. But if the Russians defend themselves, they are in a space, once again, national, territorial, of Estonia, a European country, and of NATO. With a ship, even if it's small next to a military ship, they can also retaliate, reason with it, and force it to the port.
How did the Russian plane chase, in a certain way, the helicopter and the Estonian plane?
That's right. The problem is that it violated Estonian airspace. Navigating territorial waters is a rite of passage. He entered despite being able to pass through international waters just above. The Russian Sukhoi-30 or Sukhoi-27 fighter jet entering the airspace is a violation, not what was mentioned before. And so he made sure to scare away, to avoid a collision, scare away the surveillance plane, which is a PL-26, if I'm not mistaken. The helicopter present, normally used for maritime rescue, is equipped with a winch to lower people.
So they weren't actually fighter jets, war machines. On the Estonian side...
On the Estonian side, it's a helicopter that can do sea rescue. Who is the Augusta Westland? 139 AW139. And that, it's a device that does sea rescue and surveillance. Both of these military devices are also used to save lives. But when there is a winch, we can very well bring people up and we can also bring them down. So potentially, these are helicopters that could have participated in an assault on the ship. Again, a legitimate assault, given the situation. Here, it's an overbid on the part of the Russians, who have doubly prevented a normal legal operation in a territory of a NATO country. And who, moreover, have violated the airspace. Without any response from us, once again, maybe we will...
reconsider the map. What was this Russian ghost ship doing in Estonian waters? When you're a Russian ghost ship, maybe carrying crude or refined Russian oil or some other cargo, but in any case clandestinely, why don't we stay as much as possible in international waters? Did it take the shortest route? Did it get lost?
Certainly it took the shortest route. The central channel is relatively narrow, in which there are international waters. But it's perhaps not the easiest for him, and maybe it was already occupied by other ships. We know that it is still a place of intense passage, and maybe he positioned himself 5 kilometers to the south, which is sufficient. I did. As last December, I was in this area with a ship from the Estonian Navy and a ship from the French Navy. I was in it. We were in touch with the Russians, who are constantly observing us from international waters in this area. It's normal. There's a lot of activity here. In this case,
the Estonian army chose not to launch its own warplanes. It chose not to engage in confrontation with this Russian Sukhoi that came to save between...
Quotes this ghost cargo. To my knowledge, there are Portuguese planes that have taken off because there are several countries that are in the zone. But in any case, what are the rules of engagement? When Russia violated Turkish airspace, 8 seconds, their plane was destroyed. As a result, the Russians never violate Turkish airspace again. Since 2017, the Russians systematically violate all our airspaces, including with armed planes. Sweden, Finland, Germany have faced drones and missiles flying over NATO airspaces. Every time we take off, we visit a company and fly next to them, making it clear that we see them. But there is never what the Russians would do if we violated their airspaces, what the Turks did. There is never destruction. They shot the Russians on a German helicopter in the Baltic Sea. They shot at a plane in international waters. A missile which fortunately did not work on an RC-135 in the Black Sea. So anyway, their rules of engagement are aggression. Our current rules are to back off whenever they make contact. I think...
From your words, I understand you would have preferred that these Portuguese NATO planes operated within the NATO framework.
There are Poles who also took off. There are several countries, yes. In several countries, yes.
At least go to contact. You seem to wish that these planes shoot.
At the Russian Sukhoi, at least stay in contact so that the Russian Sukhoi stays at a distance, so that the Estonians can do their job. That's a minimum.
This is the demonstration that Europeans have not yet taken the measure of Russia's aggressiveness. The Baltic is now a NATO sea. Only Kaliningrad remains a Russian piece. Everything else is a NATO sea. We can block the exit of the Baltic. We could block the exit of these ghost oil tankers overnight. It would be illegal. But no, that's what we do. The Turks control the Dardanelles in international waters, and I assure you they've closed it. No warships pass anymore. We could do the same, but they might consider it a declaration of war. However, we need one. What just happened there, under any circumstance, would indeed be considered a de facto declaration of war. He deliberately violated an airspace to attack buildings, planes, helicopters, etc. From another power, while there was no aggression from Estonia, I find this extremely serious. NATO could have reacted when the Sukhoi planes took off, giving the order to make contact with them without shooting them down. But I also remind about the Russians. I remember that the Russians, they shoot down civilian planes. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics shot down in 1983, if my memory serves me right. A Japanese-Korean plane that had deviated over their territory and the Sakhalin Islands. They shot down 2014 exactly. A plane of the militia. So these are people who do not hesitate, and we continue And that's really important because we continue to treat the Russians as if they were going to declare a nuclear war on us. They don't hesitate for a second. Forgive the
profane remark of the one who is outside these subjects, but if we are going to intimidate the Russian plane, if we even go as far as to brush against it, possibly shoot at it, and instead of a Sukhoi, there are 5, 6, 10 Sukhois arriving, and we send back in our turn. NATO has about 10 planes. Isn't there a risk involved?
It's not the entrance cap.
So life is a risky profession. You had recalled the Turkish episode, which is quite eloquent on the subject. The Russians understand this language, and I note that it is very interesting to look at how Russian propaganda uses it. This operation is described as a NATO fiasco, since precisely the restraint led to being able to claim a sort of triumph. And indeed, one of the most frenzied propagandists of Putin's regime has ironically denounced a ludicrous attempt for Estonia to become the first country that will be annihilated by the Third World War. And that's why we have the images inside the tanker, because they are very happy. We have when...
Even images to this nuance, because we, Justine, looked at all these images, the way Russian television reported it. They claim that this ship was sailing in international waters. So they say there was aggression of the Estonian Navy in international waters. In reality, Justine analyzed the images, which we clearly see on the board. The coordinates show that it is indeed Estonian waters.
He was in Estonian waters. It's a middle finger that the Russians just gave us.
And the problem is that the Russians are constantly testing our limits in the Baltic, as Xavier said. And that by not setting limits ourselves, in fact, we leave the door open to this kind of escalation. So it's a bad message that NATO is sending to Russia today.